Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to talk about functions in C++. So the easiest way to put it is, generally a function is something that takes in a certain value and then performs some operations on that value and returns to you a different value that you can use in your program, okay? Now functions are reusable, you can use them as many times as you want and they're very important. So you've probably already seen this before. Y equals x plus 2 or something like that. So this is a mathematical function, okay? Basically what this does is for each value of x, it's going to assign a different value to y, which is going to be x plus 2. So for example, if x equals 1, then y is going to equal 1 plus 2, which is going to equal 3. Okay, so this is a mathematical function. Now in C++, functions are similar to mathematical functions. The only thing that's really going to change between a mathematical function and a C++ function is the syntax, okay? It's the way you write it down. So let's write this function right here with C++ syntax, okay? So outside of my main function, because yes, main is also a function, I'm going to create another function which is going to have this functionality right here. So I'm going to write void. Don't worry about this keyword yet. I'm going to explain this in just a moment, and then I have to give a name to my function. So I'm going to call my function func, and I'm going to put parentheses afterwards. Now these parentheses are going to, it's where you're going to define the input of the function, okay? So in this case, I want my function to take in an integer x and then calculate y based on the value of x. So inside of these parentheses, I'm going to write int x. So this is what's called a parameter, okay? This is the input of the function. So when you use this function, you're going to have to define x, okay? This is a parameter. Now I'm going to write curly braces, and inside of the body of the function, I'm going to define this functionality right here. So I'm going to say int y equals x plus 2. And then in the end, I want to see out y, okay? So this right here is exactly the same as this, but written in C++ syntax, okay? So this function right here is going to take an integer x as a parameter, and then it's going to calculate y by adding 2 to the value of x, and then it's going to see out y, okay? So let me delete this, and let me show you how you can use this function right here. So to use this function, you're going to have to call this function. So you're going to say the name of the function and then parentheses, and then you have to define what you're going to substitute x for. So in the previous example, we saw the example where x was equal to 1. So I'm going to put an argument 1 inside of this function call. Okay, so here I'm calling the function. I'm defining 1 as an argument. So when I'm calling the function, this is an argument. And when I'm defining the function, this is a parameter. Okay, so the argument 1 is going to correspond to the parameter x. Okay, and x is going to be substituted by 1. It's going to substitute it by the argument, and it's going to calculate y, which is going to be x plus 2. So in this case, 1 plus 2, and it's going to see out y. So it's going to see out 1 plus 2, which is 3. Okay, so if I run this, then this is going to output 3, as you can see. Okay, and like I said, functions are reusable. You can say cout end line so that the input doesn't get too confusing, and you can call this function again with a different argument, so with a different value assigned to x. So I'm going to say func and then parentheses, and I'm going to define the argument 7, for example. So if I run this now, then this is going to output 3 from the first function call, then it's going to see out an end line, and then it's going to output 9, right, which is 7 plus 2. So in this case, x is going to be substituted by 7, and so it comes up here and it says, okay, y is equal to 7 plus 2, so let's see out y, which is 9, okay? So this is how a function works in C++. Now, what does void mean? So void is basically saying that this function isn't going to return a value, okay? This is just going to take in a parameter x. It's going to calculate y based on the value of x, and then it's going to see out y. It's not going to return a value. Now, what does that mean? So instead of see out y, I'm going to say return y. okay? Now I can't use void anymore because this function is returning some value, which is an integer. So instead of saying void, I'm going to say integer, okay? So when a function isn't a void, when it's returning something, you have to give a data type to the function, and that data type is going to be the data type that you're returning. In this case, I'm returning y, which is an integer, so this function is going to be an integer, okay? Now, this works a little differently from a void function, because if I run this is not going to do anything, even though I'm calling the function down here, okay? So what is happening? So when you return a value in a function and you call that function, you're not automatically going to output the returned value, okay? Because return, basically what it does is it stores the value in the function call, but it doesn't output the value, okay? If I say cout y here, then this is obviously going to cout y when I call this function. So if I run this is going to return 3, right? Sorry, it's going to output 3, and it's going to return 3, but it's not going to output 3 twice, because in one case we're couting 3, so we're directly outputting 3. In the other case, we're just returning y. We're just returning 3. We're just storing the value of y, and we're not outputting it. So you can cout y inside of the function, but if you don't want to do that, then you can also you can also call the function, and then you can say cout the function call, okay? So basically what this does is the function call has stored the value of y, which is going to be 3, but it hasn't outputted it, so you're going to cout that function call, so you're going to output the returned value. So if I run this, then in this case, this is going to output 3, okay? Now, you don't have to cout a function call directly. You can store that function call in a variable, okay? So I'm going to say int result equals calling the function calling the function func with an argument of 1, okay? So basically what this is going to do is it's going to call the function with the argument of 1, and it's going to return y. So it's going to store the value of y in this function call, which is going to be inside of this result variable. So it's going to return y, and it's going to store the returned value inside of this variable result, which is going to be an integer. And then if I cout result, then this is going to cout the returned value, okay? So if I run this is going to output 3. Now, if you define a data type for your function and then you don't return any value, then that's not going to give you an error. That's perfectly fine to do it. It's just not the best practices. If you're not returning a value, then you shouldn't have a data type for your function. It should be a void. But if you do the opposite, then that's going to give you an error. If you return a value inside of a void function, then that's going to give you an error. Okay, so don't do that. For example, the main function, it is an integer, so you can return an integer, but you don't necessarily have to. So inside of this main function, you can say return 0. Okay, so basically what this is going to do, it's going to return 0, and then it's going to terminate the program. Now, you can't do something which is write 2 returns in a row. So if I say return 0 and then return 1, then let me put a cout in the middle here so that you see that this is not possible. So if I run this, what's going to happen is nothing. Why? Because inside of my main function, I'm basically returning 0, and when your program hits the first return, it's going to terminate, okay? It's going to stop the function you're on. In this case, it's the main function, and when the main function stops, the whole program stops. So when you return a value, this function is going to cease, okay? It's going to stop, and so this cout statement is not going to be reached because the program is going to be terminated before we can reach this cout statement and this return 1, okay? So you can use this in your favor. You can return a certain value if you want the function to terminate. So let's say something like int n, let's ask the user to input n. Now let's say if n is equal to 3, I want to return 0, and then otherwise I want to cout 3. Okay, so basically what's going to happen here is I'm going to ask the user to input a certain integer. If that integer is equal to 3, then this function is going to return 0, so the program is going to terminate, and otherwise I want to see out 3, okay? And then I'm going to return 0 down here. So only if n is not equal to 3, then this is going to be executed. So it's going to see out 3 and it's going to terminate the program. So if I run this and I input 4, for example, this is going to output 3 and it's going to terminate. Now, if I run this again and I put a 3, then this is going to terminate directly because this return statement is reached, and so this function terminates. If I didn't have the else clause here, then it would also not output 3. So if I run this and I put in a 3, then this is going to terminate. Even though I have the cout statement, it's going to see that n is equal to 3, and it's going to return 0, and it's going to cease the function. It's going to stop the function. It's going to terminate the program, and so it's not going to reach this command right here. Now, a function doesn't need any parameters, right? You don't need to pass in any parameters to a function. For example, this main function right here, it doesn't take in any parameters. And you could say that func doesn't take in any parameters either, right? You can just say int func and then return 0 inside of func, and then let's say func like this. This is calling the function. Since the function doesn't have any parameters, you don't have to define any arguments, but you do have to put the parentheses because you're calling this function. Okay, so if I run this, then this is just going to terminate the program directly. Now the last thing I want to show you are default arguments. So let me change this to be a void, so this function is not going to return anything. I'm going to say int x equals 3, int y equals 4, and I'm sorry, this actually has to be a comma. This is not going to return anything. It's just going to see out x plus y, for example. So if I run this without parameters, so if I run this is just going to output 7. So what is happening here? So by default, I've defined x to be 3 and y to be 4. So if I call this function without any arguments, it's just going to see out 3 plus 4, which are the default values of x and y. So it's going to see out 7 by default. Now I can pass in arguments if I want, and those arguments are going to overwrite the default values. So if I say 1 and 5, for example, then x is going to equal 1 instead of 3, and y is going to equal 5 instead of 4. So if I run this, this is going to output 6. Okay, so x plus y. Now, if I just pass in one argument, then this argument is going to correspond to x. So x is not going to be 3 anymore. It's going to be 1, and y is still going to be 4 by default. So if I run this, this is going to output 5. Okay. But this is always going to correspond to x, meaning the order in which you write your arguments is the same as the order in which you write your parameters. So if I put in an argument inside of this function call, then this argument is always going to be equal to 3, and the argument that's after the first argument is always going to be equal to y, okay? So if I just put it like this, then x is going to be overwritten, y is going to be the default value, okay? So I think that's all I had to show you today. Functions are very important in C++, so you should know how to work with them comfortably. So if you like this video, if it was helpful to you, if you learned something today, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.